It was a busy 5 days, and we put a lot of miles on the wheels of our minivan during that time. Now, 20 minutes after returning home, I was sitting on the veranda in my favorite old chair with a glass of delicious dark nectar porter, thinking about how our twins were spending their first days, fluttering free from parental care for the first time. Miranda and I have just completed a journey that has turned our good old family home into an empty nest. The same journey that thousands of other parents have made before us, or at the same time as us, with their own offspring over the past few days. And I could guarantee that none of the other thousands of parent couples would feel as great as I did at that moment. Since Luke attended Georgia Tech, Atlanta became the first destination on our journey. We were also able to leave our rental car there, which meant we no longer had to change each other's driving. Our daughter Kelly was flown to Gainesville to be a Gator the next day, while we and her parents headed a few miles further east to Daytona Beach to take advantage of a few days of sunbathing and beach time. The next 3 days were filled with more sex than we had ever had before in our entire marriage. Miranda was simply insatiable. Having children early when we were both just over 18 meant that we were now only 36, and our energy reserves and libido levels were still high. On the way home, we made a short stop at a deserted truck stop where Mary did her best to prove to me that she forgot to put on her underwear for a reason. Now, while I was lounging in a chair, indulging in my pleasant memories, Miranda went upstairs to take a shower and get cleaned up. I was a little surprised when I heard the hairdryer turn on, which usually only happens when she is getting ready for work or getting ready to go out somewhere in the town. A few minutes after the whine of the hairdryer stopped, I heard Miranda's steps and the clicking of the heels of her shoes already in the kitchen, another unusual sound from my ear, since she usually walked around the house in rubber-soled slippers or simply barefoot. Before I could continue my lazy reflections on these incomprehensible phenomena, she called out to me, "Alan, honey, could you come and sit with me for a minute? I need to chat with you a little. It won't be long." Emerging from my dreams and from my chair and carrying my empty glass in my hand, I cheerfully responded, "I'm on my way, darling." Walking into the kitchen, I was amazed to see my wife sitting at the table, dressed in a fresh blouse and clean jeans, looking as great as ever. She poured me a freshly brewed mug of coffee and placed it in front of where she was sitting. Miranda seemed focused and a little tense, and I was puzzled, not understanding what her smart look meant. So I slowly sat down on the empty chair that she obviously wanted me to sit on. "What's going on, Mary?" I asked warmly, taking possession of the cup and taking a sip of the strong, hot drink. "I'm leaving you, Alan," she announced simply and casually in a calm voice, picking up a large envelope made of thick paper. "I have divorce papers here for you to review and sign." She still said something, but I was literally numbing shock. My head was noisy, and I could not utter a word, a deafening blow that came from out of nowhere. I had never practiced boxing, but in those seconds I felt like how, in my opinion, a boxer floats after missing a powerful uppercut and getting into a heavy knockdown, pushing the envelope with documents onto my edge of the table. Mary continued to hammer monotonous phrases one by one, like piles into my brain, completely oblivious to the tetanus that had struck me. "All conditions for divorce are written in these papers. I don't expect anything from you. With all my things left in this house, you can do whatever you want. All our savings have been divided and bills paid as of today, and I have canceled all joint credit cards. I notified everyone who needed to know about the change of my residential address. You can find out all other details from your own lawyer. If you need anything from me, contact me only through my lawyer." Taking a breath, Miranda continued her speech in the same dispassionate, business-like voice. "I also made sure to get a restraining order because I don't want to have any more contact with you after I leave. You will also find it in this envelope. In addition, I changed my phone number and email address, and all my previous accounts are now closed." She didn't expect me to answer anything, and I couldn't utter a word. I just sat there like an idol and stared stupidly at her on the table in front of me, and almost untouched cup of coffee exuded a light, disappearing steam and was slowly cooling. "Please," she tapped her well-groomed, varnished nail on the tabletop in warning, "don't try to create any problems with the children by trying to extract any information from them, since they are aware of what is happening and will not help you." The same thing applies to my parents. Having stopped looking over me indifferently or examining her sleek hands, Miranda finally focused her gaze on me, coldly looking straight into my eyes. "I know, Alan, that you're going to ask about this, so I'd better say it myself. I have been in a relationship with Dan for the past 13 years, and now I hope to turn my work husband into my real full-time husband. I love—" She paused for a moment and corrected herself. "Loved you, Alan. I just love Dan more. He endured and waited long enough to earn the right to be with me. Well, today I'm breaking up with you, and now I will completely belong to him alone. That's all. Goodbye, Alan." Miranda finished, stood up, and left the table, heading towards the exit. Only when she picked up the bag with things that were standing at the threshold and had already opened the front door, I finally found the gift of speech, and in a strange voice was able to croak out only one word. "Why?" Still showing no emotion, she froze for a moment, turned her head, looked me straight in the eyes, and said only 2 words. "Sandy Thompson." With these words, she stepped over the threshold, slamming the door behind her, and all I heard in the inky silence was only the fractional click of her shoes, the muffled knock of the car door, and the sound of a roaring engine, gradually moving away and disappearing after a minute. That was the last time I saw or spoke to Miranda for the next 16 months. Daddy at work was Dan Roberts, the man I've considered my oldest and best friend for the past 18 years. Miri and Dan's wife, Lisa, became close friends during their pregnancy. Soulmates, you might say, since they were both close in age. Lisa was 22 and Miri was just over 18. Moreover, Cassie, the daughter of Dan and Lisa, was born the day after our twins, which of course served as a clear sign of fate for both wives. This initial friendship grew into such closeness that they were both inseparable, which naturally meant that we husbands were also together. The closeness of the two families soon became almost like a family unit within one large and friendly family, since we visited each other every weekend, and it was very convenient to live just 2 blocks from each other. Until our oops moment that brought the twins into this world, both Miranda and I were in college. Miri always wanted to study business or business management, while I majored in mathematics while earning a partial scholarship to the college baseball team. True, at that time, I had not yet decided which path to choose in later life. Everything changed when Miri told me she was pregnant, and I had to give up all my hopes and dreams to get a job and support our family. Our parents were great to both of us, so the wedding was booked and organized by them within 2 months. I was late and the only child of my parents. When I was born, they were already approaching 40 years of age, and they bitterly thought that they were destined to remain childless. Therefore, thanking heaven for such great joy that finally fell upon them, they always gave me all the love and support that a long-awaited child could have. Miri had a brother, Tom, 10 years older than her, which meant that she didn't really have a particularly close family relationship with him. Tom left for college before she was 8, and other than a couple of fleeting visits, he never really returned to the family. Unfortunately, he died in a bizarre car accident just a year after graduating from college. This forced Miranda's parents to devote as much attention to their only daughter as my mother and father devoted to me. As a wedding gift, my parents ceremoniously presented me with the deeds to our old family home, as they themselves were moving further south, planning to retire in the next few years. I found a job selling policies at a local insurance company, quickly getting used to the business and feeling like a fish in water. The salary for a new agent was, of course, quite low, but the good commissions from successful deals could almost double my income compared to my initial salary. It just meant that you had to work a lot, persistently and late into the night, usually 12 hours a day and sometimes including weekends. In the months before giving birth, Miri took a part-time job as a secretary in one of the offices, with the same intention of getting a degree. But now she spent most of her time studying part-time online. It was during this period of time that the support of her parents became truly invaluable. When the twins were born, they became our lifesaver in caring for the babies and used any excuse to visit them and play with their grandchildren. The middle incident with Sandy Thompson occurred 3 years later. I was successful in my business, and my company nominated me for Salesperson of the Year for the North Carolina region. Our small company, which that year also became one of the market leaders and was later purchased by a national corporation, believed in my success. In addition to the $2,500 bonus, I was given an all-expenses-paid trip for 3 nights to Washington, D.C., where we were headquartered. The capital also included a gala ceremony with dinner on the first evening, at which the best seller of the year was to be chosen, and then 2 more days that remained at our complete disposal. For Miri and I, this would be the first time we left our city somewhere together without the twins, and we were looking forward to it with joyful anticipation. But 2 days before departure, everything went wrong. First, Luke was diagnosed with a whooping cough, and the next day Kelly also fell ill. Unfortunately, my presence at the ceremony was mandatory, so Miri kissed me goodbye on Friday morning with sadness in her eyes and made me promise that I would try to enjoy the next few days. Arriving about an hour before the gala started, I had time to check in and let them know that I was arriving at the ceremony without my +1 accompanying me. After showering, shaving, and putting on my rented tuxedo, I walked down into the great room and found my seat at the table, finding myself seated next to Sandy Thompson, who had arrived from our office in Little Rock. While most of the people at the dinner were in their 30s or older, Sandy was only a year older than me. I was 21 at the time, and this was her first full year with the company. Before this big event, I had only had a few beers in my life, and this place had a free open bar. During the entire dinner, as far as I remember, I only drank a couple of glasses of wine. Then, when the awards began to be announced, I was absolutely shocked to hear that I was the one who was loudly proclaimed Salesperson of the Year. Wow! Wow! Stunned, I made my way onto the stage, where I was presented with a trophy cup and a check for $10,000 to thunderous applause, and when I returned to my desk, I was kindly sent a bottle of champagne from our bosses. To be honest, the rest of the night passed in a bit of a blur until I woke up at 5 a.m. the next morning, lying in bed next to the deliciously naked Sandy Thompson. Scared to death, with ringing in my ears and a severe hangover, I rushed to my room on unruly legs, frantically packed my things, and was on my way home within 20 minutes. Miri, of course, was immensely surprised to see me 4.5 hours later when I rushed home, and as you would expect, she was not very happy 10 minutes later, when I told her that I got drunk at a gala dinner and found myself the next morning in another girl's bed. Angry, she abruptly interrupted me, refusing to listen to my explanations and excuses. The only thing she asked me was what the girl's name was, and before I could say anything else, she abruptly told me that she was going to sleep. I was going to her parents' for a couple of days, quickly packing a small bag. She, without saying a word, grabbed the car keys, ran out the door, and disappeared, leaving the children with me. For 3 days, Miranda did not answer my calls, apparently not even wanting to hear my voice. I went to work on Tuesday after dropping off the kids at the daycare we used, and when I returned in the evening, she was already home, carefully pretending that nothing had happened between us. When I tried to talk to her, she immediately interrupted me and harshly said that if I ever mentioned this again, she would immediately take the children, leave, and never return. When we went to bed that night, she fucked me. In bed between us, there was no previous intimacy and sensual love, only 90 minutes of hard mechanical sex. After that night, it took many more months for the feeling of intimacy and sex to return, but eventually it did, and as per her request, we never spoke about the incident again. The following year, Mary graduated, received her business degree, and wanted to get a job that would use her knowledge. Our relationship with Dan and Lisa blossomed to the point where we spent every weekend together, unless Dan's work or mine interfered. Even so, it didn't stop our wives from meeting and spending time together, although it became a little more difficult for us as Lisa and Dan moved 15 miles away to be closer to Dan's work. Ironically, or simply by coincidence, Mary's parents soon moved to the same area to rent a larger apartment that would provide more space for their grandchildren. In addition, they also began looking after Robert's daughter, Cassie, giving Dan and Lisa a little more freedom. Dan's company grew quickly, and one day they needed an office manager, and he himself needed a personal assistant. This position seemed to be a perfect fit for Mary, and after interviewing with managers, my wife got the job and loved it. Miranda grew up with the company and was always close to Dan, hence the humorous name Dan's work wife. This situation continued for 7 years, and then Lisa suddenly died from a brain aneurysm. In fact, This terrible blow to her happened on the day when she was visiting me, as usually happened when Dan and Mary had to go on business trips together. This tragedy was devastating for all of us, but it obviously hit Dan especially. He couldn't handle the shock himself, and he certainly couldn't look after his 11-year-old daughter properly on his own. So the solution was to have Miranda come over to the Roberts house for a couple of hours after work, 3 times a week, to make sure everything in their house was clean and tidy, and to prepare dinners that could be quickly reheated. At least that's how Mary presented the situation to me. 16 months later, I was just leaving the garage with the last box of things to load into my minivan when I paused for a second as I saw Mary's car pull into the driveway of the house. It was the first time she had returned from that memorable conversation in the kitchen, during which she had so coldly thrown the divorce petition at me. So at this point, of course, she was the last person I expected to see today. When she got out of the car, I greeted her. "Miranda, aren't you violating the restraining order by being here?" I asked in an even and neutral tone. The ban ceased to apply on the day we divorced. She waved it off, playing with her key ring. "How are you doing?" I shrugged. "Things are as white as soot. I live in the present and dream of a bright future. Would you like some coffee?" I threw over my shoulder, already returning to the house. "That would be great," she replied, following me. By this time, there was nothing left in the house except a few boxes and a lonely dining table in the kitchen. All household appliances and one of the bedroom sets were left to the new owners. The sale of the rest of the furniture and other household items among neighbors and acquaintances carried out over the past couple of days was very successful. What was left over will soon be sent to the landfill. The son of one of my former work colleagues promised to do this for me the day before I handed over the keys to the new residents. His wife and her friend also volunteered to help me with the final cleaning and organizing of the rooms of the house, although I tried unsuccessfully to refuse. A lonely greeting card lay lonely on the mantelpiece in the living room. Since I turned 38 a couple of days ago, my colleagues at the office gathered to send it to me, with warm congratulations from all of them, as well as another card wishing great luck in the new place, which I had already packed with my luggage. The company I worked for over 19 years has always been very kind to me, and it was with sadness and great regret that I was leaving behind some good friends. But it had to be done. There was nothing keeping me here anymore. Having made coffee and each taking a mug of hot drink, we sat down in the same places where we were face to face 16 months ago. "So why do I suddenly have the pleasure of being in your company on this beautiful day?" Having taken a sip, I asked with detached curiosity because I could not understand what prompted Miri to return here again after she abruptly and mercilessly cut off all the loose ends between us. "Don't you guess?" She snorted with visible displeasure. "The children received letters from you saying that you were moving somewhere. I don't understand why you didn't just call them and tell them about it. Why did you need to notify them by register and mail? In fact, I did just that because it was the only way to be sure that they would know that I was moving. Otherwise, of course, they would have unleashed all the dogs on me, accusing me of disappearing in English. Actually, I was just calling them, oh, wait a minute." I chuckled, small correction. "I called Kelly because I can't call Luke." "What are you talking about? Why can't you call Luke?" Miri asked, puzzled. "I don't have his number." I sighed. "Listen. The fact is that the children don't want to keep in touch with me," I explained, seeing from her ironically raised eyebrows that she didn't believe my words at all. "Well, I'm going to have to show my ex-wife how our kids really feel about me." My phone was on the table in front of me, so I unlocked it and dialed Kelly's number, putting it on speaker. The caller beeped 10 long times before going to voicemail. I pressed end and looked at Miri. "Why couldn't you call her? Would you be so kind? Kelly must just be busy." She answered me as if making excuses, but still took out her mobile phone and dialed our daughter's number, also putting the phone on speakerphone. It is noteworthy that her call was answered almost immediately after the second ring. "Hello, Mom. How are you?" Kelly's cheerful voice rang out. "I'm fine, honey. What are you doing now?" "Well, right now we're chilling with Cassie. We're going to a party later, so at this moment we're just lying around and saving energy." My daughter answered with a giggle and a drawn-out laziness. "Have you heard any news from your father?" Mary asked, looking at me and arching her eyebrow meaningfully. Yes, I talked to him last night. He said he talked to you and promised he'd pick up Cassie and me today. Yeah, in about 10 minutes. I think he's going to grab Luke later too before we all go to the party. Kelly chirped. I felt my insides clench painfully as I heard my daughter call Dad Daddy. Mary could always read me like an open book, so she saw how much that little thoughtless comment from Kelly hurt me. Clenching my fists, I simply leaned back in my chair and stared blankly at the ceiling. You mean Dan? Mary asked incredulously, as if not believing what she had just heard. Well, yes, Mom, who else? Kelly continued to giggle. By the way, he really likes it when I call him Dad, and in any case, you know that he will still become my father in 3 weeks. She reminded her mother in 3 weeks. My ex-wife was supposed to get married again. Believe it or not, they even sent me an invitation to their celebration. Yeah, right now, as if I was really going to show up there. Kelly and I'm asking you, when was the last time you talked to your real father? Mary asked impatiently, raising her voice slightly in which stern notes appeared. Oh, Mom, well, I don't remember. Maybe a few weeks ago, sensing something wrong in her mother's voice. Kelly's amused tone immediately disappeared. I opened and showed her my call log for Kelly's number, and Mary, glancing at the screen, could see my numerous but unsuccessful attempts to reach my daughter. To be honest, none of my children have called me since Mary left. Not a single call in almost a year and a half. That's funny to hear because I'm sitting next to him right now, and I saw with my own eyes how he tried to call you just a minute before I did. What's going on, Kelly? Mary asked in an even more stern voice. Oh, it's well, Mom. I just came our daughter's confused, bleeding from the speaker. I just want to remind you that you only have one father, and it's not Dan. We'll talk seriously about this later, young lady, the mother promised, harshly ending the conversation and irritably poking the end call button. Miranda was clearly upset as she was turned off the call and pushed the phone away from her. So why don't you have Luke's number? She returned to the question again. FYI, Dan made sure the boy had a new phone and memorized his number within hours of his old phone being stolen. If only I knew, I shrugged. Listen, don't be too strict with the children. Apparently, such was their love and affection for me that after a little over a year they found me completely unnecessary. Smiling darkly, I intertwined my fingers and squeezed them tightly. You heard your daughter. She is happy that she will now have a new father. You know that old saying, out of sight, out of mind? Well, apparently for Kelly, I am already an empty place. I pointed to my long list of calls on my phone. As you can see, I no longer have anything to do with the children. And as far as I know, in 3 weeks, I will be officially replaced by the real Dad. This comment, as I saw it, really hurt her. But it was the sad truth. I think that since you left, I've talked to both of them, combined for a total of no more than an hour. Although I tried to stay in touch, God, I really tried. Remembering one of these typical moments, I smiled bitterly. The time I was able to get tickets to the Braves game on opening day of the season, I was so pleased and happy. But when I called Luke with the news, he said he was too busy to have fun. I sighed and looked up at Mary's frozen figure opposite me. And later I found out that he and Dan and a couple of other guys went to that very game, buying tickets at the last minute. Well, if that's what they want to do, I can't force them to do otherwise. We were silent for a few moments, lost in our thoughts before Mary changed the subject with a quiet cough. So you're moving out of here to be closer to your parents? Not really. I have to leave so I can look after my mother. Now she needs constant care and attention. Oh my God, did something happen to her? How does your father deal with this? You never told me anything that she had any problems, she exclaimed while her eyes sparkled with tears. Well, at least Mary really loved my parents. Mom has a late stage of Alzheimer's disease. This is very bad because she doesn't remember anything at all 90% of the time. As for Dad, we buried him a little over 3 weeks ago. The hospital said he had a heart attack, although personally, I think his heart was broken and Dad left because he was suffering too much from disappointment and pain. Oh no! My ex-wife burst into tears and through her sobs asked, How do you know it was a broken heart and why didn't you call us? Of course I called, I objected tiredly. And to tell you the truth, that was the last time I talked to Kelly. Yeah, it was the day after Thanksgiving. That's when I found out that Luke had a new number. And our conversation with Kelly lasted no more than a minute. Without even trying to listen to what I wanted to tell her, she hastily blurted out that she was incredibly busy and would call me back soon. It's a pity that neither that day nor a week later, my daughter never called me back. I myself called her every day for a couple of weeks until I finally understood what the reason was. Ironically, although my kids blocked me on Facebook, they didn't block my dad. I later found out that when Kelly told me she was very busy, it was because she was going to the Black Friday sale that day with you and Grandma Roberts, I said sarcastically, using my air balloons. As for how I can know that my father died of a broken heart, that's easy. I never told my parents about our divorce. Yes, I was going to do it sooner or later, but I never could. I admitted, looking away and feeling tears welling up in my eyes, brushing them away with the back of my hand. I took a deep breath and continued. When you left, I went to them the next weekend to talk about what happened between us face to face. When I got there, I discovered how bad my mother's condition had become. Dad had told me before how forgetful she was sometimes, but since I last saw them the Christmas before last, her condition had seriously deteriorated. You obviously never knew about this because not once in the last 3 years have you been able to go with me to their place when I took the children there. I could not resist directly hinting at those compelling reasons that, as we now both knew well, prevented me from accompanying me and the children every time. Because of my mother's illness, I did not have the right to bring this news to both of them then, and every week it became more and more difficult to do this. Anyway, on Thanksgiving Day, after we had finished the holiday dinner and put Mom to rest, Dad began asking me questions persistently because he had not heard anything from you or the children for over a year. So I had to tell him the truth about our breakup and your leaving. Miri, tense as a string, sat opposite me, placing her sharp elbows on the table and covering her mouth with both palms. Only eyes shining with tears and trembling eyelashes lived on her pale face. In the morning, I found my father in his favorite chair. I dully continued my sad story. He was sitting, leaning back and clutching our family photograph in his hands. The same sunny one in which all 4 of yous laugh and fool around. She was still wet from his tears. So yeah, Miri, our divorce broke in his heart. You know, Mom and Dad were married for 52 years. He was a man of the old school and, of course, hoped that you and I would be together until our death. I could no longer hold back the tears that continued to draw wet paths down my cheeks as I once again relived that dark day. Rising sharply from the table, I turned to the window and stared at the pale blue sky with rare clouds floating across it. Miri sniffles and quiet sobs could be heard behind her, resting my aching forehead against the cool glass. A minute later, without turning around, I spoke quietly again. It was at the funeral that I suddenly realized how much I'm alone in this world. The only people present at my farewell to Dad were me, the chaplain, and a couple of their neighbors. Nobody else came. I couldn't even bring my mother to the funeral because she wouldn't even be able to understand what was happening. Only a week or 2 after the funeral, when my mother had recovered sufficiently, did I dare to tell her that my father was no longer with us. But I still can't stand the pain it causes her every time she hears and realizes it. So now when Mom asks about him, I just say that he went out for a while and will be back soon. Miri was already sobbing unashamedly, but I had no more tears left to cry. Over the past weeks, I had been emotionally completely devastated. My distracted gaze, wandering around the room, fell on the mantelpiece and stopped at the lonely greeting card lying on it. Miri, raising her red, tear-stained eyes, followed my gaze and obviously noticed what I was looking at. I continued in the same neutral, distant, and seemingly alien voice. You know, maybe I'm lonely, and even my mother doesn't recognize me now, but I owe her a huge debt just for bringing me into this world. So yes, I am packing everything here so that I can be there to look after her for however long she has left in this world. Finally, I turned to my ex-wife and stood up straight, crossing my arms over my chest. A bitter grimace of sarcasm permeated my last words to the one I loved so much for many years while we were together. It's amazing, isn't it? What were the consequences of your actions and how many people did it affect? You destroyed our marriage. You destroyed my relationship with my children, and on top of that, you destroyed my family. I finished the story, letting out the anger and poison whose accusation in my voice that I promised myself not to show, but I just couldn't do anything about it. Don't you dare blame all this on me. Miranda jumped up in response. Unlike you, Dan is devoted to me, and do not forget that this you changed to me with Sandy Thompson. Jumping up from her seat and instantly blushing, she pointed her finger in my direction with indignation. I'm sure she didn't expect that in response to the accusation thrown right in the face, I would start laughing, and not just laughing, but really bursting into laughter to the point of tears in my eyes. Oh yes, of course, I replied, barely catching my breath. Let's not forget about Sandy Thompson, the reason you spent 15+ years planning your revenge perfectly. I still remember that evening when you categorically told me not to mention her name in this house, otherwise you would immediately take the children and leave me forever. The ex-wife raised her chin arrogantly and defiantly crossed her arms over her chest, continuing to look at me defiantly. Well, Mary, now that you have, despite everything, carried out all your threats, I believe that this train has already left. But I still want you to hear this once and for all. I never not touched Sandy Thompson. Having shouted these words, I immediately felt great relief, looking into the eyes of Miranda widened with shock and flashing confusion frozen in place. As soon as I threw off the many years of understatement, a feeling of lightness descended on me, and I continued in a slightly calmer voice. When I woke up early in the morning in her bed, I was still wearing the same tuxedo which I was wearing the night before. Nothing ever happened between us. Seriously? Do you really think that I will believe this fairy tale? Mary spat back at me with poisonous sarcasm. Of course I expect you to believe me. Why? Yes, if only because I have never lied to you before, and of course I especially have no reason to lie to you now. When everything between us is over for a long time, I answered her more restrainedly, regaining my composure. I don't give a damn, talk what you want. She snorted, casually dismissive and sounding more like Kelly than the adult woman I was married to. For some reason, her indifferent response angered me. I could still see that she didn't believe what I was saying, but for some reason it was important to me that she did. I grabbed my phone and put it on speaker and called my old office, motioning for Miranda to sit still and not interfere. After just a couple of rings, Jane, the receptionist, quickly answered. Hello, Jane, this is Alan Dowd. Oh, hi, Alan. Have you finished settling your affairs yet? My old friend responded cheerfully. Probably ready for a big move? You know, everything will be different here without you. The girls sighed with regret. Yes, everything is already packed. I just want to talk to my old friend one last time before I go on the road. Listen, I'm trying to reach a colleague in the Little Rock office. I'm not even sure if she still works there, so I was wondering if you could look into the system and see if you can find Sandy Thompson. Of course, Alan, wait a minute. Jane responded quickly, and for several seconds only the rapid clicking of the keyboard could be heard in the speaker. After a short pause, she came back to me. Yes, she still works for us in the same branch in Little Rock. Do you need her number, or do you want me to connect you directly? Oh, thank you very much for your help. Just transfer my call to her line. And Jane, honey, take care of yourself. Remember, if Paul decides to make an honest woman out of you, I will be waiting for an invitation from you. Absolutely, Alan, Jane giggled. And don't forget us either, okay? Well, now I'm connecting you. You can talk. Listening to our casual conversation, Mary frowned, but now watched me with intent eyes. Hello, Sandy is on the line, said a familiar voice that I had not heard for many years. Hi, Sandy. This is Alan Dowd from the Grenville office. I don't even know if you remember me. My God, who am I hearing? Alan Dowd. Are you asking if I remember you? Damn, I've been dreaming about you for so many years. The very man I wanted but never got. And suddenly he calls me, Well, Sam. And he answered, laughing. How the hell are you doing? She asked. But without waiting for an answer, she chatted on. It must be some kind of telepathy because you won't believe it, but just recently I was thinking about you. It's been how long? Yes, it must be 16 years since you and I last spoke at that very gala reception where we met. Remember, I then saw you several more times at other ceremonies, but alas, I never got another chance to make up for lost time, but you yourself know how intense all these crowded events, important meetings, conversations, and other fuss were. Of course, I remember how we first met then in Washington. I finally managed to wedge myself into her chatter. Actually, it was 17 years ago, although I must admit, apart from the award ceremony itself, I don't remember much from that night. I admitted to her, chuckling. Oh, Alan, you were so funny that evening. You could hear her smiling in her voice when she said these words. What do you even remember? Well, I remember how after my clumsy thank you speech, I left the stage and then it seems we were still drinking champagne at the table, but I honestly admit, from that moment everything in my memory became a little blurry. I can only say that this was the first and last time in my life when I got so drunk, I admitted embarrassedly. Sandy's loud, boisterous laughter came through the phony's speakers. Yes, damn it. By the end of the evening, you were pretty good, although in my opinion, you didn't drink that much compared to the others. Alan, do you want frankness for frankness? She teased me with a sly voice. Well, hit me, Miss Thompson, with your frankness. It's interesting. I played along with my former colleague. I must admit that I had my eye on you that evening, although I knew that I had serious competition from all those unmarried ladies who gathered there that evening. Well, yes, of course. A tall, dark-haired, attractive guy, built just like you, looked like a pot of honey with excited bees hovering around him. Ah! Sandy laughed infectiously again. I joined her, glancing sideways at Mary, who, listening to Sandy's babbling revelations, pierced her lips in hostility, twisting them into a rather sour grin. When I dragged you to dance, then, quite by accident, I swear, I slid my hand there below and felt how big and hard you are. Oh, it's getting a little hot here. Yeah, and then I almost fainted because of it. True, being called Mary all evening was a little unpleasant, but at least it showed me how much you loved your wife. After Sandy's words, Mary's expression changed sharply, and now she even seemed to turn a little pale. Around 11, you once again muttered, Mary, dear, and then just passed out in your chair. When the party ended after midnight and everyone went to their rooms, you were still there in the hall, so I asked the night porter to help me drag you to bed. Yes. I definitely didn't remember all this, so I listened with interest to Sandy's story about that night, which became the starting point of no return in our story with Miranda. The big problem was that no one knew which room you were staying in, and the hotel computers were already disconnected from the network. As they said, a program update was carried out at night or something like that. I didn't really delve into it. The point is that these door key cards are all the same, and it doesn't say what number they are from. In general, the only reasonable solution at that time was to put you in my room and believe me. Even in itself turned out to be a difficult task for such a big guy as you were, and even barely moving your own. Ha ha ha. Members. There was a pause on the phone. Only some slight rustling was heard in the speakers. After a few seconds, Sandy spoke again. Sorry, I took a couple sips of water, but while I was chatting with you, I got a fever, and my throat was dry with all these memories, she admitted with a laugh. I stopped there. Oh yes, you finally ended up in my room. Well, I have to admit that at that moment I was ready to get a little naughty, she said in a rather embarrassed voice. I already said that I accidentally felt your unit when the receptionist and I were trying to drag you onto the bed. It was just a casual touch, but I immediately realized that you were not only tall, but also something of a decent size. Well, you know what I mean? She sprayed into the phone again. To my regret, you almost passed out while we were dragging you into the room, and then you immediately collapsed on the bed, muttering something inaudibly. You know, even though I wanted you, Sandy sighed, but doing something with an almost insensitive body, this, in my opinion, is somehow piggish and generally not in my rules. Be that as it may, I myself was a little drunk that night and very horny, so I stripped naked and lay down next to you, hoping that when you open your eyes and see me, it will surely seduce you. Well, she sighed involuntarily again. It's obvious that this trick of mine never worked, because when I woke up in the morning, there was already no trace of you, and no one there saw you until the end of the weekend, no matter how much I asked. So all I can say, Alan, is that your wife must be a very lucky woman. Miri, her eyes widening in shock, covered her mouth with both palms, and the enormous scale of what she had done struck her like thunder. I honestly admit that at that moment I did not have any sympathy for my ex-wife, because the root cause of the entire disaster of our marriage was her own hasty actions and arrogance. The subsequent cold-blooded planning and years of calculated scheming aimed only at getting revenge on me prove it that I did not actually know the real Miri. "Oh, about that," I responded. "Now she is already my ex-wife, and if I then knew what I know now, I think I would have agreed to your tempting offer," I answered Sandy, chuckling. She laughed loudly. "Well, honey, you're about 7 years too late if you were hoping to restore our connection. Now, I am a very happy married woman with 2 wonderful children. I continue to use the last name Thompson in the office because all my clients know it and are used to it. Well, actually, officially, I'm Sandy Roberts. I met Robert 8 years ago, and he was the first after you who managed to find a way to my heart." At these words, a wrinkle appeared on Miri's tense forehead. She squeezed the edges of the table with her fingers, and her face was distorted in a pained grimace. With a fixed gaze, she stared at the phone lying in the middle of the table, as if the head of a viper was swaying in front of her, ready to pounce. Looking into Miranda's face, I was puzzled because I did not understand her reaction. "Ha, by the way, it's because of Rob that I thought about you, buddy. Isn't it weird?" she said, laughing. "Well, the thing is that his older brother Dan is getting married in a couple of weeks, and his fiancée named Andy like you has the last name Dowd. So I wondered if she was your relative because you are the only person named Dowd among the people I know. Well, now I understand Miri's reaction. I can't say that now among my relatives there is someone named Andy," I said, with a fair amount of irony looking at Miri, although in fact I remember that the only relative I knew with such a name was still in high school. It was so long ago that I almost forgot about it. Oh, by the way, I remember that she hated being called that so much that she would just get mad and scream like crazy because she thought people would mistake her for a guy. I grinned, looking meaningfully at Miranda, who blushed like a boiled crab, looking away and pursing her lips in shame. I really didn't know the real her anymore. Come on, come on. No one would mistake Andy for a guy now. She's gorgeous. She has amazing children, Kelly and Luke, who are now in college. Kelly and Dan's daughter, Cassie, are best friends and share a room in Florida. They were both bridesmaids in my wedding, and Luke was Rob's usher. He did a great job preparing the ceremony and entertaining the guests. Yes, a great guy, let me tell you. Over the years, we spent Christmas and Thanksgiving several times with Dan, Andy, and her children. Rob once told me that they dated and interacted closely on and off for 13 years. Can you imagine? That short statement told me so much. This proved that Miri's parents certainly knew what was going on between Miri and Dan and always had her back. When my wife was away from home, I would always call her, and they would make all sorts of excuses for her as to why I couldn't talk to her directly. And soon after, Miri would call me back as I pondered Sandy's last words, mechanically assenting to her. Suddenly, her tone of voice became more serious, and she began to speak a little more quietly. "Actually, Alan, to be honest, I don't think they should get married because even if they go for it, their marriage will be doomed in advance." "Yes, I was surprised. Why do you think so? What could stop them since they have been together for so long?" Miri, as a directly interested person, was even more amazed than I was. Her eyebrows flew up, her mouth parted, and she tensely leaned forward. "Lord Allen, because they are both serial traders. I mean, Dan also cheated on his first wife, Lisa, with Andy. I don't know how, much less why he did it, because Lisa, I assure you, was also stunning, although I never actually met her. But I saw her photographs. Anyway, Andy and I had a candid conversation about this one day, and she told me that her husband and children understand that she has a husband at work and a husband at home. She said that she divided her time between the two of them, while her house husband had something similar with the woman he worked with. Can you imagine such a relationship?" "Yeah," I mumbled, unsuccessfully trying to catch Miranda's stubbornly elusive gaze, who was looking anywhere but into my eyes. A ripe beet could envy the deep brightness of the color of her cheeks, neck, and even part of her chest, which was now heaving intermittently. I made sure to make it clear to Rob that I would not hesitate to rip out his belongings if he ever even thought about such a thing. Sandy shared with me her uncompromisingness in this matter with threatening confidence, and then she simply and unpretentiously detonated a bomb, dropping a damaging weapon directly on my ex's head, although Sandy herself did not even suspect it. Well, Dan still has someone on his side despite his relationship with Andy. This is kind of his thing. "I think that this dog always had an alternate airfield," she snorted. "His current girlfriend's name is Tilly. and he sees her every time he's in Chicago. By the way, from what Rob told me, he specially arranges these business trips for himself so that he can go there every couple of weeks. Watching Mary's reaction, I saw that her complexion changed from bright red to first pale, and then she seemed to even turn a little green. Leaning onto the table, she silently gasped for air, and it seemed that just a little more, and she would vomit right on the spot. Sandy continued to animatively post the latest news from my former best friend's shithole. I don't think they would have gotten married at all if his bosses hadn't directly ordered him to make Andy an honest woman after her real husband sued the company when she divorced him. Can you imagine, Alan? Her house husband had a completely different understanding of this relationship, and he did not put up with all this chaos. There are still normal men, right? Rob told me in confidence that his company had to fork out a significant amount of money to hush up this matter. 100 pieces, thank you very much, I thought to myself. And in addition, they gave Dan an ultimatum. He must correct the situation so that everything is covered, otherwise they will show him the door. How do you like it? Not the best basis for starting a life together, is it? Continue to bang on the side of your bride, and at the same time look into the barrel of a double-barreled gun pointed at her face. Miri jumped up, knocked over a chair, and stumbling, rushed into the bathroom, and within a few seconds I heard her throwing up inside out. I can't blame her for this. After everything she heard today, her cozy little world that she had built so long and carefully turned upside down and was literally flushed down the toilet. Honest, loving, and loyal Dan turned out to be a fake, but that, fortunately, was no longer my problem. I chatted with Sandy for a few more minutes, during which she told me with love and pride in her voice about her children, and also asked me what I was going to do now. I told her that, on the recommendation of my former company, I was already applying for a job in a branch of an insurance company whose office was located not far from my mother's house. True, instead of the usual insurance sales, I was offered to investigate suspicious insurance cases, and for me this was a very interesting area and a new challenge in my career. The money would not be the same as what I earned before, but it would still more than cover my needs. Among other things, my new position came with a personal office and a personal assistant. So in terms of work, I was back on the horse and looking to the future with cautious optimism. Miranda returned, exhausted, clutching the walls as I ended my conversation with Sandy, exchanging numbers and promising to keep in touch from time to time. After saying goodbye to Sandy and pressing the end button, I looked at Miri. My ex-wife was clearly not in the best shape. Her face was wet, pale, and miserable, and most of her expertly applied makeup was either smudged or simply disappeared. Now Miranda looked as if she had aged many years in just 15 minutes. "Tu mi so pitiel," she sobbed, collapsing powerlessly into a chair and dropping her head on her outstretched arms. This time, I really believed her. "Me too, Miranda. Me too. Listen, I don't have time right now. I need to follow the tracks of one type while they are still fresh, so by morning I should be in Brunswick," I answered, glancing briefly at my watch. From here to Brunswick, it was about a 6-hour drive if you grilled non-stop, but I knew I'd have to stop a couple of times along the way. "All these boxes are yours. They contain all the clothes, photographs, and other junk that you left." I waved my hand towards the packages piled up in the corridor next to the entrance. "I was going to send them to you next week, but since you're here, I can help by throwing them in your car if you want," I suggested to her in an even voice out of the indestructible politeness instilled in me by my parents and remaining indestructible. "Actually, can I ask you a big favor?" she muttered quietly, not even having the courage to look me in the eyes as she spoke. "Can I stay here for the night? I don't think I could go back home. They're right now." I thought about it for a few seconds, jingling the set of keys on my finger and then unhook it a couple and place it on the table in front of her. "What the hell? Why not? Here are your keys and flag in your hands. Stay. But when you leave, you will have to leave them in the office of the real estate office. I warned Mary. The new tenants will arrive on Monday, so you have a whole 9 days at your disposal, if, of course, you need them. This Sunday, people will come here to help me take unnecessary things to the landfill and clean my apartment. Utilities will continue to provide their services until Monday." Finally, I looked around the room again and mentally slapped myself on the forehead. Walking over to the mantelpiece, I picked up a greeting card that had almost been left there from my caring colleagues from my previous job. In my new place, I will continue to be warmed by the friendly sincerity and warmth of their hearts. Now all that remains is to say the last goodbye to your ex. Okay, it's all over now. Take care, Mary. I really have to go. Goodbye. I hope we never see each other again. As I walked out, I turned around and took one last look at the one I once loved with all my heart. All that remains in my memory is the hunched shoulders of a broken woman sitting at the table, trembling with painful sobs. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.